different.
No, we started live streaming now. We can't talk about the game anymore.
I'm not. What game? What are you
Sorry,
talking
buddy.
about? The fuck are you talking about? I'm not a gamer. I'm not a nerd.
Me too. I just read books.
Which ones?
Another total lie.
That's what
Choose
I
your
said.
own adventure.
Not
And
comic
I could
books?
read a book in like a day.
Did you ever read like an actual book cover to cover?
There have been the occasional.
I'm assuming it's going to be like Leonard Susskind stuff.
I could count him on my, we'll say, fingers. Yep. But anyways, yeah.
I'm not
so
that much of a fiend myself. It's very rare that I do finish a book.
here we are on a Sunday once again. It's been a couple weeks, and we are back with the Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 79. That's Portal Mountain, not Poor Mountain.
It is poor. It is poor, but it is a portal.
Yep. That's what matters. These are, of course, casual meetings. We're here to enjoy ourselves and discuss one of our hobbies, I guess you could say.
Hobby,
There's
worldview.
There's more to it. You could say.
Well, I believe that shit. Believe being a very loose term.
You could call it an enterprise, because what we do is continually active in organization generating, I guess.
Yeah, that kind of got sidetracked again.
Bootstrapping. It never does. It's always the same base, right? It's bootstrapping. So we are bootstrapping the Portal Mountain Corporation.
Still. Yeah. I haven't lost track of that. It's just...
Well, it's like, where do you put your energy?
The model is very tenacious.
I keep thinking and coming back to, it's important to...
Is that the right word?
To keep doing communication. Sure. Communication is kind of key for like a model and like protocols and that kind of stuff. Like that's what Portal Mountain Corporation is.
Would you say that's the reason why we're like honing in on the whole topology thing? In the previous meeting. Because if you think about it, it's all about like protocols building up layers and communicating up above,
right.
And protocols building up layers and communicating further up above.
Yep. So this is the ontology we've been getting into the last couple meetings.
Yeah.
I suppose. Hopefully we are going to progress to the myth side of things and kind of put it together as to if the ontology is like the bits and pieces mechanically, how they come up together to form layers higher and higher. The mythology is kind of like the other way around, where it's like you assume the world around you is
already
like this,
built up.
Let's say this animistic, quote-unquote, worldview, our version of animism, I guess, or whatever.
I think it coincides with the original.
Our evocation of animism.
Yeah.
The capital A, the true animism.
With the one and true animism.
Yeah. So
Sorry,
the myth,
that's a joke.
The
Don't be
myth would
offended.
be kind of the downwards
Top down.
causality side of things, where
If I may.
you're taking that as this is an in-world reality experience, moment to moment.
So, if I may, the ontology will be like the what, the things that are there, right? Like the space, in time, the static, so to speak, map of things,
Sure.
if you will. The mythology would be like, what is it doing from one moment to the next? How do you what is the narratological arc to define?
Right. And
Which symbols capture those events?
in order to have an arc, you must have
those-
compose it with units of what?
Yeah,
That's
and-
your ontology. That's the
those
types
yes,
of things.
and what I'm saying, those events are composed of the elements of that ontology. So that's the difference. The what and the constituents and what are those constituents are doing is the two sides of this coin.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense even in terms of like building of layers of emergence. First you have the what's, and then there's the what now kind of connection through time, another dimension.
I love that you
Kind of
said time here,
depending.
because if you notice, this is actually coinciding with the two archetypes of space and time,
Right.
with being the two extremes of consolidation and decay.
Right. Right. And that's kind of along the lines of something we were getting into before starting. I think it's going to come up, the archetypes.
They're coming up because they're just naturally embedded in the model, right? Like they're not. The archetypes are there to help propel explanation of some things.
I made a comment on our way here that something about, like, I was thinking about politics and how people are often divided left and right kind of idea. Pardon. And how that kind of relates a bit to, like, order and chaos, as in left and right are like different minds' way of thinking separated in two, as if you're not supposed to do either one at the same time. It's like that way of thinking makes either the order side or the chaos side, if you want to say, solidifies those into a certain order, and then exclusively makes that the one true acceptable one,
And
excluding the other order, which in your mind
is seen as chaos. Yeah.
Right.
I'll be right back. That's a good line of thought.
So
you notice before I leave.
Just to divide the mind the way the mind works, but I was gonna say you need to connect the two together to synthesize. Could be a type of term in the area. Consolidate, but through feedback, there's going to be that like, what's in my mind and what's in my body, what's the world out there, and like this kind of kind of dichotomies, chaos, order.
Just before leaving.
Break time.
The one thing I wanted to mention, without segueing into anything in particular, is that you'll notice that our usage of the words order, chaos, time, space, those are the archetypes that we've long ago discussed.
Right.
It's not
good to know.
It's not a matter of trying to connect the two subjects right now.
Pull up the chart
I just
too.
only want to demonstrate the fact that those archetypes are in place to demonstrate the playing field, the spectacle, if you will, of the concrete. So the mythological layer, if you will, boils down to these archetypes, because now we're seeing them come up now. We're seeing the order, we're seeing chaos, we're seeing the ontology being built up. Those are the elements of that ontology, and now what they're doing, how they're interacting. So that's the key there.
Right. You're talking about utilizing an isomorphic model, we could say, or the model, utilizing the model.
Not only that, but this is pointing to the fact that our mythology is very specific and segues into the archetypes for this reason. However, this is not the main subject of the conversation.
Sure, you just wanted to bring that up.
Note.
I thought it would come up, so I think I'll pull up.
Do it later, but
I'll
right
pull up
now
the chart.
It's a good thing to keep in mind.
I'm sure it will. And with that, we shall be right back. All right, let's see if we can pick up where we left off. So chaos order. I thought we might use the kind of idea of left-right politics as kind of maybe example, and like our discussion we had earlier today.
As a caricature of the model, I would assume, because in the model, that transforms into egalitarianism and fundamentalism. As the nomenclature itself.
Caricature, right? Yeah.
Yeah, left and right becomes a caricature of that. I love to paint it as up, above and below. And so people say, "Are you left or are you right?" I'm like, neither. I'm above and below. That's just to be a dick, but yeah, it actually doesn't amount to anything different, to be honest. Which is why I said caricature. I'm sure you can paint the left, which one is egalitarian, which one is fundamental. Between left and right.
Yeah, that's. I never thought about that one, but yeah, you could say, "Oh, I'm above." What are you? Above or below?
No, you can't. No, left or right.
I know, but
above and below. See, one is with an or, the other has to be an and. That's
right. I get that.
That's the
right. I was thinking the way to kind of throw it to mirror, reflect. You could say above or below. I'm above. What are you?
Yeah.
Above or below?
But it can't work that way. That's the kicker. Like that's what I'm trying to say.
Right. It's kind of a mocking.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of mock it that way, but it's a mock and
then
not
a
mock.
To say I'm above and below, above and below.
You have to have the synthesis.
Then it's
because it's the
that
layers.
Becomes a serious position, not a mocking, right?
Yeah, in a way.
Have you ever thought about this dimension?
It's a mock and a not mock. It's also a mock of the whole
one of
idea.
those dirty centrists.
Yeah. I was about to say it's like the mockery is of the centrists. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The reason it's mocked is because of the compromising position that it's in. The point isn't to compromise, but to synthesize. What that looks like is a tougher cookie.
Synthesize is, I think, a used term in philosophy. Pretty sure, but
I'm just saying that it's like it's two sides of a single coin rather than looking at it as two different coins.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like what is it like the logical type of thesis, antithesis added together is a synthesis.
Well, it's in the name.
Formal philosophy. I can't remember who this.
No. Okay, might be a philosophy.
I'm just saying the term is used in some way.
We have exactly two terms to mean exactly the same thing. To cover this situation, egalitarian fundamentalism and fundamental egalitarianism.
Right.
It sounds like
I'm just saying the
positions.
term synthesis itself. We have to be careful when putting a
okay.
capital S synthesis, if whatever that means.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
So in this case, I'm talking about like you can't have.
Synthesis has to be alive and feeding back.
Yeah. So this is demonstrated in at least the qualification, model speaking wise. You don't have fundamentalism and you don't have egalitarianism. You have fundamental egalitarianism, and you have egalitarian fundamentalism. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you don't escape the two.
You're trying to bring up some developments we've already done in the past on politics.
This is not a new statement. What's the key?
What's the model? Our theoretical model of politics?
Well, the key. Yeah, it's not so much politics as it is still just model. It's just a way to divide politics or absorb some politics into the model, if you will. So key is that you don't have a divide or even a spectrum. You have a unity.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
One thing I was thinking is the idea of like protocols would be a conservative type feeling idea to that well, however
Right.
something should be done, this is the way it is because
Consolidation.
that's been consolidated in previous layers. We already know this.
Right,
kind of
and
thing.
you want to be conservative in that sense. You don't want to give it up. Once
Yeah.
you've gained the consolidation, you don't necessarily want to just.
Right. So that's a great and important politics, which completely makes all discussions interesting if you follow that, I think.
Right, but then you have the second discussion, the context in which this thing appears. If it's great on its own, but it shits on everything else, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it's still not great. It's great on
Right.
its own.
But
It's too isolated from everything else, so it's like a runaway
this
process.
is how experimentation happens, though. You gain that feedback, and then you're like, okay, we're not just going to take this concept wholesale. We're going to take that whole on and like add our own special whole on to it
Context,
to interface with what we do and like keep away other stuff we don't need, kind of for this.
Yeah, so you don't basically don't shit where you sleep. Right? So like if your concept is great, but it shits on where you're sleeping, overall, the
So
overarching
are you pointing now at the upper side, if you will, or the?
you know what? I think the better playing field for this discussion would be the concept of entropy. If entropy is always increasing, right? And an increase in entropy means disorder from the context that you're in, right? The increase of disorder. However, the increase of disorder also allows for increase of order in localized places, spaces, and places. Same thing.
Right. This is the Portal Mountain origin myth.
The question then becomes, how do you balance out the increase of entropy with the localized decrease of entropy? So you gain more from the decrease, but in order to have more decrease, you have to do even further increase. Where is that balancing point?
Feels like
It's the same kind of
what you're
discussion.
pointing at is that self is kind of multitude. There's like core, but like what am I part of? Because I'm exporting my entropy outwards. What kind of damage does that cause around? So therefore I have to internalize the so many
Consequence,
others,
yeah.
which become selves in a way.
Yeah, and that's basically becomes what's called consequence. So, right, like action reaction, none of this exists in a vacuum. So the point that I'm alluding to really is that you can have localized increase in order at the expense of disorder around you. If that becomes just unbalanced in a sense that it just goes towards that, right? So you're only getting one thing that becomes great and greater and greater and greater at the expense of literally everything else. If everything gets sucked up into one single black hole,
Right.
nothing's
You're
left
reminding me
everywhere
of
else.
the paperclip maximizing algorithm.
Paperclip maximizing algorithm. Now,
You've never
there's a
heard that?
phrase.
Yes. Because you sell paper clips, your company.
Okay.
You, I guess, is it, yeah, it's just a commentary on capitalism, but let's say it's an AI. Your company hires an AI to do everything in its absolute power to sell as many paper clips as it can to make the company rich,
So
the
it's-
CEO rich.
So it'll calculate like one per sheet, two per
In-
sheet
initially, but once it through capital and all that hits a certain point, the plan is executed, the Earth is enslaved, and
and there's just
the-
paper clips. that
everything for emission to the nearest. There's like an asteroid coming by. They need to
make more paper
mine
clips.
it. Yeah,
We need more paper clips.
just flips the switch.
Yeah, something like that. That's pretty out there.
But that's what capitalism.
The runaway process, and that's what I'm getting at. It's the runaway system. The runaway,
on its own, capitalism without being, let's say, or
Contextualized.
true capitalism, or whatever you want to say. Like,
context is the word I love to use because like it's taking this automaton thing and places it right into an environment, and now like is there a corresponding reflection going on?
Because every system has a, well, not, I don't know every, but these types of systems have a capacity to destroy their environment and to themselves no longer exist.
Right.
So that somehow that seems to point to there being an internalization of this problem and an ability to somehow communicate, like something, there's a want for protocol of how to do this together.
Do you remember I described the soul as a kind of this lack, a quality of lack, a want? I think you're hitting on that right now.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I had another thought. What is it a lack of? It's the lack of a narrative. So there's a disconnect in the experience, which
Right.
narrative does not cover.
Right.
Right. So the mythology
So it
that you
automatically
believe in.
feels bad.
Right.
Because there's not a
There's no
natural a connection that normally happens, or the mind can
Meaning.
usually.
That's what meaning captures. There's no meaning in
Right.
that. In from
And
this
that's an
moment to
interesting
that
thing,
moment.
because how would one know if how they're interpreting meaning is kind of not all there? How would one detect that? How would one put words to that feeling?
The thinking I'm having right now, it's like the disconnect is it's going to be like the arbitrariness leading from one moment to the next. So the lack of narrative to supply how that progression happened
Mm-hmm.
is the lack of a narrative that a mythological narrative that says this
Interesting.
moment needs to move into that moment.
This is like
Or the narrative is just incongruent with the mythology you already have. It just doesn't fit.
this is like a pain that
Right.
humans can be born into worlds. Think about most of the world.
Well, if the system is
really-
incongruent, then everybody is born into that.
If you want to say the capitalism and free market is the way that it is, which it hasn't developed to
Is the word
that
congruent
point,
correct?
meaning compatible.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Um,
interrupt. I mean, I did, but I didn't.
Yeah. Just that, I forget exactly, but musing on the fact that we're born into this capitalist society which hasn't advanced well enough to internalize those problems that it itself is causing to itself, right? How to work together to deal with it.
Every problem has a sellable solution.
This being like the world, how the world is set up with markets and money as a single paperclip that everyone must get the most of possible, right? That's all we're doing.
Shiny pebbles?
Money, every country has money. Every country exchanges money with other countries.
You know what? That's actually, I didn't realize this, but that was a great metaphor. The paperclip stands for just your penny.
Right.
That's all it is. It's a penny.
Money maximizer.
Right, like you do everything in the
Profit
world
maximizer.
to extract more and more of these coins
Right.
at the expense of
And
literally
then
everything
what's
else.
kind of weird is you have trouble explaining to the system your actions if what you're doing is trying not to destroy your environment.
The system is always hostile to that.
But
It doesn't because the
but this is a
money
major
is a
problem,
quantification.
a major hurdle,
Right.
because that
It's
has to be
not
recognized.
not a major hurdle. It's the hurdle. The tall order. The jump from quantity to quality.
Then again,
That's what's resisted in the most in most everything needs to be
unless you're the
quantified.
Portal Mountain Corporation,
Right, which
your-
is a stug.
this isn't your main focus as a business. Is how to
It's a
how to even create the demand for sustainability or whatever, or that whole systems thinking.
Well, Portal Mountain Corporation would be a response to that state of affairs and saying, no, that's not the way it should go. That's the response to it, which is why it contrasts how it is contrasted in the first place. by being like an observation of the fact and the feedback into it, reinstating the model back into the cycle.
I forget what we were talking about, but yes, that is good.
Primarily about runaway systems.
Right. The money, the profit maximizing AI, which is running in all of us, so we have something to collectively chase. And this is really our highest potential? Well, anybody can maybe see that what we're all doing kind of like precludes any kind of stopping and doing something else. Like that's all that it is. You get money, go after money, get money, right? Then can have whatever you want.
I'm going to go ahead and be a dick a little bit. So the whole idea of higher potential and money not being it, I'm going to go ahead and say that chasing money is the one thing that tells you that there is such a thing called higher potential. Note, it's a quantification. Low, high. Right?
I don't think we have to worry about hurting people's feelings who would self-describe as money chasers.
My point is different. My point is that there's no such thing as finding our higher selves. That statement in and of itself is actually laced, fabricated by the whole money chasing idea to begin with. So the alternative isn't to find a higher self that isn't related to money. The alternative is to drop the entire idea of higher self. To sort of contradict myself.
Higher self is bad? I didn't get what you're saying. The idea of a higher self is a disconnecting idea?
No, the idea of itself is promoted by the idea of making money. What constitutes higher? Some kind of success, some kind of accumulation, some kind of recordable attainment. So the idea of a higher self without the concept of money is a contradiction onto itself. You shouldn't be seeking a higher self. That's a gimmick. It's a prize. It's a trophy. You buy it. Money is time. Time is what the cost is. That's the only real quantification, time. I mean, from time, everything else stems. It's kind of like the driver behind everything. Anyway. I'm glad that you're paying attention.
I am.
Calling you out there a little bit.
I don't know, it just gives us a chance to kind of maybe get back on track.
Listen, my point is that it's not about getting higher, a higher version of yourself or anything like that, but there is a model speak for this as well, called maturation. So mastery, grand mastery. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's not a position above. It's a position that is, above maybe mythologically, but like it's about coherence, and it's about membership, and it's about the reflection of the lower. So there's no jump from low to high. There's
the
a
higher is the
unification.
lower. That's the strange loop. It must return back to itself.
It's more like saying there was already a high, there was already a low, and the two need to merge. That's maturation. So it's another way of saying that the right and the left need to combine or become above and below. The theme repeats itself, obviously.
So we've got this ontology of the type, kind of like the types of things in the world around us, and the myth of how they're coming together.
Yeah.
And that pattern is like a consolidation and decay,
So coming
which
together
is
and
happening
breaking
over
apart.
and over again. You can look at kind of myth stacking, maybe. I don't know.
Okay. Well,
I'm just trying
to understand real consolidation and decay, can I get a little bit technical for the next few minutes? As a segue explanation so that it's understood.
Yes, but I just want to make sure what I hope to be understood.
I can demonstrate it.
Is where is the layering connecting or happening?
So I'm going to try to explain it back to like using letters, words, all of that kind of stuff.
And we're talking about the neurochemical operating system, the concrete, abstract, mimetic.
So yeah, it will apply to any layering. This is just like a metaphor for that. So start off with your medium, right? In medium, you can move things through a space in time. Those motions, in their accumulation, become a pattern. So what I mean is that you can write a line this way, you can write a line that way, you can have a circle, you can have this, you can have that, you can have that, you can have that. So many different ways to put a configuration of space and then alter it through time
kind of,
with different sequences of symbols.
Seems like you're pointing at the very idea of changing your environment, and it happens cumulatively over time, which could be a pencil scratch.
This is your playing field. So right now we have established absolutely basically nothing except that you can do whatever the fuck you want with it. Now, this is the expansion of that layer. You can draw a line this way, that way, the other way, whatever, right? Consolidation comes into play on this layer is when you restrict yourself to drawing only this sequence of lines this way.
Share.
So if you restrict yourself to only drawing an A, a B, a C, a D, E, F, G, all of the alphabet, right? So in the space where you can draw whatever symbol you could possibly imagine, you're restricting yourself to exactly 26 symbols.
Kind of funny looking. Sorry, yeah, that's like condensing, consolidating.
Exactly. So, but notice before
this
that,
is our alphabet that we're all going to use.
But the layer it comes from is expansive in that you can articulate more and 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 more symbols in it, if you please, right? Noise. You can create much more noise. You can create symbols that make zero sense in any language whatsoever.
Like, you mean if you want to go down a layer, quote unquote, from the alphabet?
I mean just this. You have the ability, you have your space, and imagine if time is ticking this way. You can draw whatever here, whatever here, whatever here, whatever here, whatever. Well, just keep going and whatever, and it's be noise. It doesn't mean anything. You have choices in like how, where
I think
you can.
we agreed in what we just said.
But then, if you decide on A, B, C, D, E.
Don't have our camera. Set up.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm showing you. As the only symbols from that space that we'll ever actually need to use.
Didn't add very much.
Yeah, I just said all I did is squiggle.
Don't have a live shot.
All I did is created a bunch of squiggles at the top, and then
an alphabet.
and then wrote down the alphabet.
So when you have your consolidation,
Right. So we had an expansive space which we consolidated into. Now
this is like the topology terrain, kind of like the topology maps.
we're just saying, out of all the possible symbols, we care only about this pattern, this pattern, this pattern, this pattern, and this pattern, and so on. Just the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to the next layer? Oh, we have words. We have So, notice this is another expansion. We've consolidated only to those letters, right? But now we're like saying, put it in this combination. Put those letters in this combination.
I know, and then
put
you
those...
make sentences, and then you make paragraphs, and then you make pages. And
So
then
you're
you have a
carrying
book.
wholesale big signals as little tiny signals in the next phase. Those become big signals combined together in a pattern, which become one signal in the next layer. So
Yeah.
So the difference between here to here
It's
is
like
a layer.
summarizing or shortcutting in a way. That's how we
You consolidate.
can easily think about it.
You consolidate on one pattern, but then you decide on how many, what, and then you expand on, okay, what can you do with combinations of these patterns? These become new patterns.
So
What can you do with combinations of those patterns? And on it goes. And each time you do that step, you're up a layer. So past the word,
And this,
you have a sentence.
these things
past the
are
sentence,
happening
you have the paragraph.
physically in our neurochemistry, like, as in like literal tendrils going from one, like connecting idea spaces, regions together.
Another key point, these words are still just these letters. These letters are still just these squiggles. So no matter how many layers we're going down, we're still actually part of the exact same medium out of which it all comes, depending on the layer.
Right. We discussed that
significant
in extensive detail. I think the last couple.
Well, to point back to what you're
we've
just
been
saying,
trying to get at this layering stuff and the.
So why I mentioned this is because atoms don't cease to be atoms just because molecules exist, but molecules are not atoms. Same thing with letters are not squiggles, doesn't mean squiggles don't exist.
There's a point within the
Or,
APS, this ontology world, where you end up having not just like atoms to molecules, but it's like
concepts.
Like groups of concepts coming to make this higher group or something.
Yeah.
And just so there's, which I guess is it's got to be holonic, because these groups are kind of arbitrary, but they can be broken apart and seen in totally different ways. Like it's all put together in the moment, right?
Well, the holonicity, if you will, of it is more evident when you apply this model to it and say this is how it's been constructed. Because it's been constructed this way, it is holonic. So bottom up gives it that kind of freedom, I guess you could say. With that, I'll be right back. Sorry.
In that case,
I'll be quick.
no need. Yep, we'll be right back. All right. Welcome back.
Yeah, so we're touching on a bunch of, again, different tangents, but in essence, they're all connected. The reason being, primarily, is because on the subject of applying a mythology to an ontology, well, we've already used the model, so to speak, to describe what the ontology is and what it works like, sort of the layers and the protocols and all of that stuff. Perhaps not a perfect explanation, but at least one that
Good
we're
enough to
working.
proceed, hopefully. With
One that we at least between ourselves are able to work through. And so on top of that, we are discussing the mythology, right? What's going on? Again, that really comes back to the model, and that's the mythology that we're trying to also elaborate on. The narratological parts of how the ontology is moving through space and time.
right.
Which is why, at the end of the day, we're not talking about a crazy mythology. We're
This
always
reminds
coming
me
back
of
to our terminology.
so this is like plateaus of commodification within the lifetime. Think about that. Like this would be the dark side, if you will, or the negative, the caricature of correct plateaus of or holons of, not holons of commodification. What would be, you know what I'm getting at, I think.
Actually, I'm kind of lost as to
Um,
the idea behind. Like, I get the references. I'm just not sure how to.
So
where
it
connects.
would be, so the wholesome history of human
Oh, the ideal.
development would be something like throughout time, our society going from participant to membership to mastery to grand mastery.
Okay.
And as if instead of the plateaus of commodification, as we could describe that as a pseudo history of capital or commodity, we have also a pseudo history of
Grand Mastery.
grand mastery, right? So that's our myth of that's what's happening.
Right. Okay. So, right. So, if a myth is like the way you use words, then our model is providing the words and how to use them. Right? So, not only does the model provide the terminology for all of the ontological elements, but also the mythological elements.
As it should, yeah.
And that's really the point, is what I'm saying. You'll notice that not only did we describe the models using our terminology, but the myth, the two layers are basically just the same model. That's what's happening. We're reusing the terminology again to talk about the next layer.
Mm-hmm.
So in the one case, you have
Sounds
your
about right.
concrete objects, and the other one you have how they're moving, and that's literally hugging the horizon and the neural operating system between the concrete and the narrative, and the shared, sorry.
Mm-hmm. And the how they are moving is implies heavily, I guess, time, well, like time through space through time, time through space, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's funny about this recognition is that if you think back to our discussions of the cognitive window, well, that's just exactly the horizon that it hugs. Right? When the window is in discrepancy mode, it's jumping over to the mythological as the concrete,
Mm-hmm.
with the concrete presented as the abstract. So your meta never goes beyond the actual abstract. It never goes into memetics.
I liked how you used the term discrepancy mode, did you say, of the window alignment?
Yeah, cognitive window alignment discrepancy.
But also, yeah, you're referencing the discrepancy. This kind of, because that's not a bad thing for the alignment window to be in that
No,
position.
it's the normal thing.
So, yeah, I think
It-
did I call it that, like, I might have called it normal mode. It almost seems like that's what you would say. And then there's debug mode, which is a kind of heavily computer programming jargon type of thing. I don't know did we have another term for that? I called it that, I think, because I don't know if we had something, but it was to reference the idea that your ontology is no longer the archetype, but what's actually going on
to build
to even
ontology.
create ontology, that's now your archetype.
Yeah, so meta-ontology, essentially. And that's what we're getting at. Animism is our meta-ontology. There is no ontology that isn't built upon the animism to begin with. Which is, I guess, a tough sale, but the point isn't to sell the idea. It's a point of reference and discussion for us, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's useful to understand the consequences.
Wait, what were we talking about?
If you build any other ontology, it's out of the constituents of the model anyway. So the meta-ontology is our ontology, which is the animism ontology, which is like the mountain peaks and all that kind of crap. Just pointing out that it's like, it doesn't matter how much high you want to get away from it, it's still captured by it.
Mm-hmm.
Not as like an ownership thing, but like as a
Yeah. I
principle.
feel like this would have been a while ago to kind of connect the idea of the mountain peaks and member portals and coming up one way but just vanishing and appearing on a totally different
Yeah.
stack.
Well, that's what aids, if you will, with obfuscating it too, because it's so subjective, and those peaks can be jumped like this so easily.
Right.
To begin with. You can
Somehow-
the charlatan makes those shortcuts and those pathways, those unnatural, so to speak, pathways available.
Hmm. Maybe connecting things that
Shouldn't have been.
that don't point to something more fundamental or whatever.
Funny enough, you can accept the idea of shouldn't have done that with that, but the fact that Jordan Peterson shouldn't have done what he did bothers you because it's a name. But it's the same idea. It's like there's just certain things. The model
That fact itself doesn't bother me.
The model is clearly saying like there are categories of actions that don't go well together, basically.
Yeah, and I think we came to a kind of conclusion that that sound bites can be taken and should be criticized, and that's all fine. But that this is a different from the person who is, and there's this kind of
Well, yeah.
process of deification of people, and when it's a living being, that causes problems. And this also comes back to like even how we treat each other and how we classify and categorize other people based on what we think
First of all,
we're seeing or whatever.
First of all, just like a blanket statement out there with regards to sound bites themselves. That's what narratives are. A narrative is just a very long sound bite.
Right.
So,
But
my point being there is like it's not about believing or not believing sound bites. You don't get to deal with anything but
okay,
sound
here's
bites.
my actual, I'll give you my knee-jerk reaction. When something like, let's say a video breaking down some of Jordan Peterson's clips.
All right. Yes. Today's fresh example.
And it's presented as, in case or whatever, just so you know or whatever. So it's presented as the point here is Jordan Peterson is a shitbag.
No, he's full of shit, which causes him to behave like a shitbag.
Right, so that's the same. That's an identity label. He is full of shit. There's shit inside of him.
But
That's on him. Jordan Peterson, the person, has shit inside of like his intestines and stuff.
No, not the person, and that's the key. That's the key issue.
How do you? No,
That's
but
the
this
key
is how it's
issue
taken.
We both have.
This is how it's taken, and that's why
No, I
I
know.
gave you the knee jerk. because this is how people look
my
at it.
knee jerk is to remind you is that we're not talking about the flesh blood Jordan Peterson, which is its own persona and dealing with his own life problems, whatever.
Yeah.
We're talking about the mythological entity that is materialized in the social space of our collective community that is also identified as Jordan Peterson. Now that's a caricature of a human being. However, Jordan Peterson, the person, feeds that caricature. So there is an element of responsibility on his end as well. The problem is that caricature,
over time,
that caricature is very much full of shit, objectively so.
But everybody forms that opinion on their own in completely different ways.
Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what opinion to form. But this is a valid expression of an observation, and if this is an observation, then it could potentially be observed again and again and again, and in my observation, it has been. Guy's full of shit. And until he stops feeding the mythological beast that he's created of himself, so long as the person is feeding, the actual person is feeding, he can also be held responsible for feeding that fucking beast. And that's all I have against actual person Jordan Peterson. It's like, why are you feeding this shit?
Yeah, I agree.
The mythological persona is just like, dumb as a fucking brick. I mean, if this is what he wants to feed, then I'm going to hold him responsible for creating a dumb as a brick persona. Why not?
But like,
if anybody is glorifying
this
him,
kind of thinking, like the idea that the feeling that comes in people's heads when they're like, yeah, he's an asshole. Like, if they see him in real life, are they gonna be like, wow, it's so nice to meet you? Like, here's my opinion.
Okay,
there's also it's gonna be violent or something in a lot of cases and all this.
I forgot to mention that this kind of stuff needs tact. Here, I'm speaking to you in a quote-unquote safe environment where I believe that nobody's going to take my opinions too far out of context to begin with. We can at least agree on what the fuck I'm talking about.
But I'm saying my knee-jerk is...
This isn't the speech I'm going to give
my
somebody
knee-jerk,
I
it was
don't know.
delivered as a personal attack. That's how it just felt like to me.
Well, then...
This is personal to you against the person of Jordan Peterson.
That's just a misunderstanding of how I tackle the subject like this.
I know.
I get why.
I know.
I get why.
That's why I'm saying.
It's instinctive because most people would have that reaction, but that's not what I'm doing. And I do rely on a bit more grace, if you will, as a result, because I assume I'm speaking to a different kind of a... Sorry,
Jordan
kind of a person.
Peterson got swept up in politics and the hive minds that are out there.
Peterson got swept up by the dollar bills. That's it. He's making money.
Everybody.
He's making money off of
Everybody's
people who are
swept up.
desperate to believe him. Like John. Sorry. John is the kind of person he makes up money off.
Okay, so maybe it can.
Maybe that's my personal grief.
You personally think that
Great.
Jordan Peterson is, in his charlatan ways, is kind of extensive, and allows people to hold certain delusions.
Encourages to hold
Better.
certain delusions.
Let's say, like, point to red pill ideology. That kind of
He
stuff.
encourages the delusion of authoritarianism. He certainly is on the side of keeping to the status quo of the system.
Authoritarianism.
Oh yeah, that's the pyramid thing that I mentioned earlier. That's like all about that. It's like, see how it's all across nature because crabs. There's like it's bizarre to fucking listen to. Is what I will say.
So he's having his license revoked unless he does training, remedial training.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, I think
what license?
He's been forced to practice.
I think he violated some very specific conditions of his practice, which is why.
Whatever, wouldn't apologize. So then.
Ah, Right. He took it upon himself.
Yeah, but
to
they
be
did that now, so I think he has to do it or not.
He took it upon himself to be offended for having to refer to people by their preferred. No,
This
that
was
wasn't.
the
That wasn't even
original-
it.
that was
That
one of
wasn't
the
even
original
it.
things
That
that-
wasn't even it. He was protest.
thought.
He was protesting that he would have to be forced to use the pronouns, or else be quote unquote canceled or whatever the hell it is. And he was pointing to a specific legislation that happened in the Canadian law, and whatever. And so, Buddy over there actually read the law, and he was looking for it, and all they found is that they.
But isn't he now
there's a
having his
clause-
license removed
Yeah,
for that?
the license
Because he ultimately refused to. Now his license is gone.
I don't recall the details of that story.
So
but
what's your point? If that's what's
my
happening,
my point is what his gripe was with.
and he got his wish too.
His gripe was ridiculous, though. So there was a clause in the law that said you shall not discriminate based on sex, age, gender, blah 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 blah. And what they did is added a thing for like identified gender. So like an extra, extra group that is included under the same
Okay,
protections.
so legally he can be charged or whatever.
No, that's all hyperbole. That's all like
But you said it was added to the law.
A law that already existed and accepted. There was
But it was added.
a specific.
So now it is
another-
Canadian law.
No, I'm saying the law.
So it's not
not
law.
the law added. The law existed.
Yeah.
A group, a small, tiny little group,
Was added
also to a huge list of groups
to
that
the
are already
law.
on it. Right. The people
Okay.
that are identified as being generally discriminated against.
It's like,
systemically.
So then, now
So
that
he-
it's law, that means there's punishment.
The law existed. A group was added to it. So basically, the law said, don't be a dick to such and such and such and such, and a new group was added to, don't be a dick to that specifically. So it would have been no different as if he just wasn't a dick to begin with. Like, if you're just not a dick, the law doesn't give a shit about you. That's what changed. And he made such a big gripe about it, about how he's going to be personally persecuted by it. Which amounts to what? Him wanting to be a dick? Like, that's his argument. That was literally his argument. I want to be a dick to this specific group of people. What
I think.
are you talking
I don't know
about?
if that was
Not
how
you, but
he
him.
argued it, that he just wants to be a dick to them.
No, but this is exactly what he presented.
I
Whatever
think
the
he
fuck runabout shit
said-
he was saying, that's what he ended up saying.
something like I don't know.
The point is, the law was the law. He misrepresented the change, and then decided to get
There's a clip out
bent
there.
over it by that misrepresentation. It's called a straw man. You build a straw man, and then you attack it. That's what he did. That's another reason
But-
why I have zero respect for the fucker.
So, wasn't it something like he refused to use pronouns? That was like the first thing, and he.
No, those were
was
his
talking-
claims. Those were his claims, and he
No,
sa-
but he became famous for doing one thing and saying something. It's like, I refuse
Look,
to have to use
that video I
pronouns.
showed you covers that all of that saga. If you feel like watching those 3 hours of all of his shenanigans, it's going to be part of that. You want to know? Go
Well,
ahead.
then you should know.
Dude, I don't remember. It's like it's something like it's what you say.
Forced speech. Like, isn't that Jordan Peterson's
He wasn't
first,
forced to do any
first
speech.
big? I'm not arguing whether it wasn't. I'm saying, isn't this the issue that he first became famous for? I'm not even starting arguing. You're arguing. I'm just trying to.
I don't
is that
understand
it?
the question.
Jordan Peterson was nobody. Nobody in Canada or anywhere knew about him. Suddenly, because he
No.
made
This
a
is how
stink
you.
about something,
This is how
he
you
became famous.
This is how you.
So how did he
found out
become
about
famous?
it. Before that?
When was the first time people really heard
He was
about him?
like
A lecturer?
Yeah,
Like
people.
what, some
people,
YouTube students knew about him?
He
No, he
no,
gained national fame at what point? I can Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
I don't know that much about him detailed. What I do know is that he definitely predates that in terms of fame.
obviously he's like some kind of prominent teacher.
Because otherwise, why would anybody pay attention to what he's bullshitting about?
No, he
Like, I
had
don't know if-
lectures. He's a lecture hall teacher. He records
Yes.
them. So what? That was nothing until he hit the stage, the world stage, with the single episode event
No, that wasn't
where he
that.
made a stand.
That wasn't it. That's not
Yeah.
when he became famous. He was already famous in his circles
Well,
before that. It hit
Tiny
it hit the
academic-
circle. It hit the circles who didn't give a shit about him before. Then, yes, that's why you know about him. But he definitely predates that. He was a charlatan way before that.
he made a YouTube video.
Yeah, that was
criticizing
recent.
Political correctness as 2016. That's what this wiki says. That the rise of Jordan Peterson, Wikipedia. Criticizing. Wait, where is it? The hell?
Yes, he is a YouTube personality. Like his fame, his claim to fame was through recent times. So obviously YouTube and whatever. But his fame abroad, like you're saying,
Controversy around him criticizing Bill C-16 and pronouns and political correctness.
yeah.
That's all I was trying to establish.
Yeah.
That's when he became famous. That was his
Yeah.
big thing.
And I'm trying to establish that what he did was mischaracterize what that bill was.
His argument wasn't, I want to be a dick, though.
No, it did. It did. It was.
That's not what he was saying.
Of course not. Can you imagine saying to the world, all I really want is to be a dick? Of course it didn't say that. He said a whole bunch of things that pointing to him really actually fundamentally wanting to be a dick to some people. Because otherwise, why the fuck is he arguing to begin with? Like, there's literally zero logic behind it otherwise.
One thing I think is interesting, regard merits and all this aside, the people who would agree with Jordan Peterson and want to like feel threatened, like, oh, if I misgender somebody, or if I don't know if someone's a man or a woman, and then you make a guess and it's like, but now you're getting a lawsuit. People are afraid of that, whether that's true or not. But this is all, like, let's say conservative side.
Yeah.
Let's call it that.
It's weird logic because,
So, but either way, that's who would support that. So
Yeah.
this kind of a bill criminalizing that, like...
No. The bill didn't criminalize anything. There was no change in any different criminalization codes or any of that stuff.
You keep saying that, but it added a class...
Yeah,
Which specifically conservatives would have a very hard time even, like, wrapping their reality around. Like, it's so far out of their brain.
Not really.
It's so far out of their brain that they can't even interface with it.
I don't believe that for
Yes.
a second.
A lot of cases,
unless like it's not any more out of their brain as women, black people, or anything to that effect. There's like zero difference between how far out of their brain it is. It's just not them, therefore they don't give a shit, therefore it's fucking wrong. Period. There's no thought to
Well, this is how politics work, though, I think, and ideology and all that. On both sides, of course.
The only thing that was added to the law is a difference between the biological definition of sex and also identification version of gender.
90% of conservatives
That's
have
all
a,
that
have a
happened.
major problem.
They have a problem with
even
every
doing that,
but
at
they have
all.
a problem with every single
And
class of that
90% of
list.
Democrats
Listen,
have no problem doing
listen. They have a problem to begin with every single.
that. Or liberals.
Listen, they have a problem already with every single category in that list to begin with. So it doesn't matter which category you may add there. They don't give a shit about that. It's the fact that it was added. That's it. They have a problem with women. They have a problem with people of color. They have a problem with children. They have a problem with disabled people. They have a problem with every single fucking thing. It doesn't matter. It's just the fact that it's on the list. It's not the merit. The merit doesn't account for it, and the merit, you know yourself, wouldn't fucking matter either. You don't give a shit if somebody has a penis in their fucking blouse or skirt. I mean, you don't care because you're not talking to them on that level. Do you talk to people and ask them what's between their fucking legs all the time? No.
Mm-hmm.
So why does that group matter? There's no reason behind it other than
I
I have a problem with.
It's nice to relate to people as humans because things get uncomplicated.
I'm sorry. I just need to unravel this fucking fuckery of logic that's behind all of this thinking. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm with you, but all I was saying is 90% of conservatives have a problem with that, and would be the ones paying it.
Okay, so we have 90% people with
and
problems.
90% of liberals
Of their
have
own
no
making.
problem with that. And
But-
isn't this interesting though? It's a completely political divide.
It's not though. It's the divide isn't political. The divide isn't stupidity. It's being made political in its expression because politics is all we have going in the system. The divide isn't about the politics. The divide is about the stupidity. People have it in their head, a mythology, that certain things should be a certain way. And anything not conforming to that needs to destruction. That's the mentality that's wrong, and why I'm taking issue with Peterson's assessment is because that's the mentality he's taken.
Which assessment?
With the law. Like another group was added to don't be a dick to group. Explicitly. You should never fucking need an explicit definition for this in the first place. The law is retarded. Okay? Look, the law is retarded. It's there because people are fucking retarded. Somehow.
By the law. It's
No.
a process.
Well, it's not helping the situation, let's put it that way. The law is retarded because the situation is retarded. Nobody should be a dick to anybody to begin with.
I found
and therefore we
interesting-
should never have to have those laws to
You
begin with
mentioned
and all of that
something
shit.
earlier.
But that's me in my ranting mode. Sorry, everybody.
No, it's good. You mentioned something earlier about the right, like this is left and right, being easily targeted for their like unified.
The right is easily targeted, yeah. Because they have figureheads.
Right.
The only left figureheads that I can think of are all ones that are specifically targeted by the right as figureheads. Okay, they're called figureheads for some reason for the left, but if you look on the left side of things, nobody actually gives a shit about them. So it's kind of like a weird conundrum. It's like Taylor Swift.
Mm-hmm.
She's like this targeted lefty, right? So dangerous if you've listened to the radio or whatever.
I never heard that on the radio.
Or
That was a
no, I forget.
track title.
Oh, right. No, maybe social media. Anyway, the right is just like talking about how Taylor Swift is like going to skew the voting outcome of the election, and she should completely stay out of politics. There's like a bunch of articles from the right going up on and on and on about how Taylor Swift is being political and she shouldn't be. Taylor Swift, on the other hand,
there's a kind of warfare to that.
Taylor Swift, on the other hand, has zero interest in politics. Is there just like
when you imagine an enemy, you create it yourself, and maybe that defeats the enemy that could have been there, or who knows.
The funniest part of the story is that on the left side of things, you have your Swifties, and the people that vehemently hate them. So being a clique within the left sphere is also to be not popular within the rest of the left sphere. They're disconnected. They're gnawing at each other. So the infighting within the left makes it impossible for there to be a propped up figurehead. Because as soon as there is one on one side, their other side is like, no, this one, no, this one. This is so much more important than that. Hyperbole, of course, but
that's your assessment.
I mean, day by day, it seems to be the ongoing conversation. Have you seen a variation of that? Sorry, not a variation. Have you seen a non-variant of that within left circles? Because that'd be interesting. It's always about who should be and for what, and nobody can agree on anything.
Portal Mountain, my friend.
Again, the right side is also laughable because they're quick to prop up the figurehead, but then it ends up being something like Trump. And then you listen to this guy open his mouth, and you want to vomit, because that is not... those are words, yes.
Don't you want things
but they're
to be
not
great?
Sentences. They're not sentences.
You don't want it to be great again?
Which is...
How could you say no? You don't want...
I'd like to know what
you don't like greatness?
I'd like to know what we're talking about, maybe. Just a snippet of actual intention and meaning. Oh, meaning.
Greatness.
Right. The
mythological greatness.
So you know where you lose your soul the most, right? When there's no gap. When there's a gap in the narrative between moment to moment. That lack of narrative is the increase of the soul. So, with somebody like Trump, guess what you lose fastest? At least on the left, the process is slower. Because you don't believe anybody, so you lose the meaning a little slower. But eventually, they both wear you right out. So it's a matter of time. Anyway, that got esoteric, eh?
Yeah. How do you determine meaning?
Model.
Well, obviously.
Meaning,
but I mean, as to look
quality.
out to the world of the things, different people, different campaigns.
So I've described soul as a lack of meaning. Well, then what does it mean?
Zeitgeist.
So, yeah, zeitgeist is the collective. But, conversely, if there is a narratological exposition from shifting of one moment to the next, you do have meaning.
At a fundamental level, correct.
On a functional level. The model is moment to moment to moment to moment. Meaning
Yeah.
is constructed
It does. It's like a kernel or a seed that can be unpacked into the rest of the meaningful area.
We're not trying to go for the definition of meaning is. We're talking about meaning as a quality, and the meaning as a quality appears when the moment shifts and there's a narrative connection from that moment to the next moment. That narrative is the meaning of that shift. There's nothing complicated about that. It's a functional definition, if you will. Qualification.
There's also a comparison of how well that map did, though,
That's
right?
That's affect. That's affect. That's not meaning. Meaning affects affect, aka this means bad. affect bad. Or sorry, affect affects meaning. So if there's a pain, and it's the narrative from moment to moment becomes this is bad. So that's the meaning. That's what gives the meaning to what the bad thing is. Why that thing is bad. This happened to me.
Anyways,
You know
we
what
can go on a break
You know what I'm saying?
and pick it up. How does it do?
How does what do? Putting me on the spot there.
How does the mythology shoot across the ontology?
I'm glad you asked. That was pretty funny.
A little out of nowhere. Sorry for the question.
Yeah, like what's the connection we're trying to make? Well, bottom ups. Speaking bottom up, we have all of these layers coming up. Top down, we have this situation of like, how do these layers talk to each other without reducing themselves to only being the medium out of which they're coming out from. So like, what makes communication between layers up here different from layers here versus from just the medium doing medium things?
I forgot to turn YouTube chat on, but Edith Boozy said pink shirt is 100% correct. Thanks for that.
I don't disagree. Cheers. Cheers, Pinky.
Mm-hmm. That makes you the brain. What are we gonna do tonight?
The same thing we do every night,
Boss?
Pinky. Narf. No, wait, that's your line. Somebody's having fun with their car alarm.
Yeah, I suspect it's at maybe King's Castle or whatever there. It's
Yeah, that's where I was this morning.
peopling, sitting on their keys.
My daughter went to a birthday party. When we came to pick her up, she had this face.
Has to go. Damn.
We got her on board.
Nice.
Alright, so why ontology does mythology? We kind of know why mythology needs ontology.
Right, something to tell a story in a world.
Right, it doesn't have any
types of things that exist out there.
Yeah, otherwise they're just
And then it's a
vacant
question,
variables.
what do they do? It's that time, like, exponential, dimensional,
Yeah.
whatever.
It's like it's filling in the blanks in the vacant words. Otherwise vacant words. Like, what's a sentence without meaning behind every word, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of getting back to our stacking, our protocols, membranes, and our signals and expressions. Actually, the expression is really what I wanted to get at. So you noticed that I condensed a way of writing anything down to a bunch of symbols called the alphabet, right?
Sure. Yeah. Phonetically, this is what we're going to use.
So if you can imagine this, on the lower layer you have your like individual motions of each stroke. On the next layer you have your letter. So because there are a multiplicity of strokes making up a letter, the full combined pattern, right, is composed of many different signals. So you have signal. Each dot, for example, on the paper is a signal.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine as I'm drawing a letter, there's a start point, and then there's a connected series of familiar movements to me, like an overhead arc, and I may be coming back under and just complete a circle or whatever. That's
Yeah.
one.
So from the bottom looking up, you have a whole bunch of protocols that say to make A, go this pattern. To
So
make B,
when you make
go
that
this pattern.
starting, when you do a start and you write a circle, there's a lot of things that start with that in your memory. So you could imagine flowing off to a number of different letters.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. The point being is that on the one layer you have a whole bunch of different strokes. On the next layer you have a full letter, right? And you have to use the
By
full
next
letter.
layer, you mean one of these, I don't know, dendrils has went out and connected to this
Mhm.
series of ideas of a stroke that goes over and
You
then
have an-
under.
And then you have an A.
That two idea connection or whatever is like comes off into its major, like that's an O. If you came back and did a stick, that becomes an A, which the dendril would have like two connecting that O, but also another one
Mhm.
becoming its own new pattern to trigger as a signal something else. So complexity
Yeah, you're getting
builds
there.
up automatically in
You're
the
getting there.
neurochemistry.
You're getting there. I'm just trying to still build up here a little bit. So, you started off with making a multiplicity of strokes, right? Each stroke is a signal on that layer, and the pattern of strokes creates the letter, like you were saying, right? So you arrive at an A. Now, to make a word, you have to use A as is each time. Always that pattern, right? Always, always, always.
Mm-hmm.
So what distinguishes one layer from the next is that this pattern in the one layer, called an expression in that layer. So in that layer you have an expression which gives you the A. That A becomes a signal, just a one unified signal for the next layer, all at once, always complete. Now, of course, there's going to be biological variation. I'm not talking about variety of how that can appear. I'm talking about like the whole thing has to come unified, and B has to come unified, and C has to come unified, all of that. And then there's those patterns that combine into words. So now this word has to be fully signaled. The full thing, not parts of it, full.
Mm-hmm.
And on, this is what makes up the next layer, the fullness of it. So the whole chunking, the whole chunk of the picked up uniformly and replicated somewhere.
I have a feeling like when that becomes that signal, this is like the kind of epiphenomenal jump or whatever. You're having this kind of, I'm just imagining like a dandelion flower, like the seeds almost, like how many there could be stretching out to a bunch of different, maybe that's too many to imagine, but off on its own, coming up to a signal, but then you have other similar entities sitting on top of those signals, which just have to go to that signal. They don't have to go in and trigger the rest of, like they trigger through that structure existing. So like,
sure.
I'm imagining instead of things getting like super crowded all the time, it's building kind of outwards in its simplification.
I'm not sure that that's the imagery I was going for, because what I'm trying to get at is that you on the lowest layer, signal. Take that signal as a pattern, and if you call that whole pattern a signal, you're now jumped to another layer where it can combine with other signals.
Yeah, so it becomes
that
a
conform
nexus.
to the same protocol.
Becomes a nexus point for access of all kinds of different new ideas, utilizing that little atom.
So check this out. So on the next layer, every time you have a signal, you're actually looking at pattern. So like the strokes at the bottom layer of writing a letter, repeated and over in different patterns, become A, B, C, right? Now you transpose A's, B's, C's as their whole signals.
I get it.
And then words as their whole signals, and their sentences as their whole signals. That's how you make the distinction between the layers, where the signal pattern makes what's called an expression, and if that expression becomes a signal onto itself, you're talking about the next layer. That's the horizons. That's where the layering happens. That jump from signal pattern to being an expression, and that expression then, like signal pattern being the full letter pattern, becoming its own signal. So now you're back to the world of signals, and you create an expressions out of signals. Those become signals again. That's your next layer. So it's like words becoming a sentence. Now that they've been shuffled into a specific pattern, another layer of meaning was created. That thing travels as a unit.
But I mean, we've said that a million times, and it's a very old idea. Why do we just spend like half an hour?
Because the technicality of this keeps getting lost. The technicality between jumping into the next layer is when you have signals creating an expression, which means they have to belong to a grammar on that layer, aka something to pattern them specifically. And then the jump to the next layer happens when that expression becomes a signal onto itself. And now you're working with signals again, with their own protocols. Get it? Own protocols, like signals get arranged in different patterns together, but each signal is an expression. But each signal of that expression is an expression. Just like our molecules are still atoms, our atoms are still quarks, our quarks are still maths. But yeah, like it's not never leaving the medium, but also rising up through layers in that medium. Like, what does it mean to be down at the bottom at the medium level versus thinking and breathing and all of that stuff? Because you don't change from being the elements as being a human being, but you use those elements in a very different and very specific way. Those are that's expressions becoming signals. So atoms becoming molecules, molecules becoming macromolecules, macromolecules becoming cells, cells becoming tissues, tissues becoming organs. The holonic model. You never leave the medium, but you're not the medium. You speak in a different language, and that language is a condensed version of. And that condensed version can have different properties than the raw version. So, for example, the raw version has negative, positive electrical charges. It has color charges, all of that stuff. But on the molecular and cellular level, we work with neutral charges, with potentially with ions, potentially with this and that and the other. It all holds together in a different way.
I'm interested in the content of the APS, if you will. The fact that we have this neurochemical operating system, which seems to have this like storage database of like of ontology and all that kind of stuff.
It's a driver for the mimetic.
It's really interesting. What is the content of that? So it's like, what are we taught as we grow up? What do we learn undeniably? Like there's some things like
well, our description of the APS points to a lot of that.
There's like a quality to it, like how accurate it is. It comes down to like feedback as being a process which is used to develop, to utilize whatever is utilized from it, taken is fed back based
Okay.
on the experience.
So another way of addressing your question here is that the topology and the mythology that we've been describing together, like mashing together as two different layers of the same medium, if you will, that medium is the APS.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what the APS is churning and going through, because that's the level of which things exist or don't exist and any of that kind of
Right.
stuff. How they're categorized, which
It's
peak
like
they appear on.
There has to be a representation of both the higher and the lower, kind of.
Yeah, so the description, if you're interested in the APS, that's exactly what we're going through, just on a different
Because we have the ability
arc.
to shift our lens or our window to what we're interested in looking at, how we want to approach something, right?
Yeah. So we've been describing the technical makeup of what appears throughout the APS. Peaks, jumps through peaks, the actual mythology playing itself through.
Right.
Basically, we haven't actually diverged from that very subject, to be honest with you. We just didn't use the same terminology.
I guess let's say we have like an hour left or less. We got like half hour.
Dream is another a term that fits into this category, into this discussion, because the APS, the dream, is the ongoing mythology playing itself out, right, moment by moment. We already involved moments to begin with, and moment is important. If there's the mythology to describe the shift, and you have a lack, sorry, if you have a mythology, you have meaning. If you don't, you have a lack. That's that quality of soul. So lots of different points from previous descriptions of the model, I guess. are coming into this.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the key
I
is...
like that it's a moment-to-moment experience of whether what's happened to you, what is happening to you, does that make sense to like a bigger picture? To like, is this meaningful?
Well, the way the picture is described...
Do I understand even why? Like what was the point?
For one, if you were to describe your personal experience in words, you will have to use words you've learned from other people. So, do you see the disconnect that is happening in a natural sense? You're not going to be able to quantify. You're not going to be able to use mathematics, for example, to like transfer that information. You would have to rely on allegory. You would have to rely on metaphor, all that jazz. Because likeness of an experience is more in the mimicry of the its consequences, its perceptions, its whatever the fuck you're mimicking. Like you're going to interpret your experiences based on your previous ability to express what experiences are. You're going to liken them to other experiences and so on and so forth. Which is why I can't quantify to you the taste of watermelon,
sure,
for example.
But when you say meaning, you bring up meaning again, and I'm thinking about like my
self-referential
mention
problems
of the plateaus of commodification, and like what would an isomorphic plateaus look like. It's like civilizational level degrees of coherence, and like to have that as a...
So you can't go below a plateau. That's what makes it a plateau. That's the bottom. That's like where you're bottoming out, basically. So if you're rising the plateau systemically, the model has to accommodate for every layer that has already happened before it, so as to not negate the system to begin with.
Right. So maybe plateau is just not the right word. But
No. But within each plateau, coherence is an acceptable proposition. So, like, if you don't reach a plateau, but you reach a coherence, you don't necessarily reach the next plateau. I
what you're saying, yeah.
You could still,
This is a part of no going back. No point in trying to go back.
we already know how electrons work. Like, fuck. What the fuck are we gonna do? Like, forget? No. Like, that's not the point. Again, that's never been the point. The point isn't to like, take the system down. It's about rearranging it.
True accelerationism. It ideally kind of self-arranges based on
resistance.
Kind of resonance from the bottom layers, if you will.
Well, the bottom layers definitely resist the most because they're pressed the most to begin with. Like if you think of the analogy of pressing something down, the bottom has the worst of the pressure. The issue that physics and this example illuminate is that if you press too hard, the bottom disappears and the whole fucking structure collapses. And then what? The top got nothing. The top has nothing to stand on, basically.
Yeah, it's probably difficult to find viable discussion in this area of like systemic, like who are we as people, as humans? What is our humanity? How does that help us relate to each other? What does it all mean? Are we penny maximizers?
No, I don't think that's the correct direction for the discussion.
No, well,
I don't think
discussion's over. There's like 15 minutes. I'm not going anywhere.
What I'm saying is that I don't think meaning, what is the meaning of life, isn't the question that we should be answering it to begin with. I think that's a dumb question.
Who asked that?
Anybody who's probably trying to sit in on this conversation.
The meaning of life. But
Isn't this is what we portray ourselves to be trying to figure out, in some sense? Like, even if we don't, isn't that what people understand? But ultimately, that's the wrong question.
it's a classic like Buddhist type trope. Thoughts about Buddhists.
It's the wrong question because it's a meaningless question.
But myth, the point of this is myth. That we must all have myth, but when the myth doesn't seem to describe what is going on, what you're experiencing, it's painful. But there is
Here's an
that
interesting myth.
can describe easily everything that does happen, even though it may not be like...
Here's an interesting but lucrative myth. Life has a meaning. That's not a useful myth.
meaning? Like one?
Yeah.
There is a one meaning?
Life has meaning. It's a useless myth. But life is meaning is not a useless myth. Because it doesn't tie meaning to some arbitrary thing. It just ties meaning to the expression of living beings who always act in meaningful ways. There's nothing that you do that doesn't have meaning to you. That's what I'm trying to get at. There's little things. There are no things that you do that don't serve some kind of internal purpose that's being reflected back out. There's always a story that you're telling yourself for whatever the fuck you're doing.
That can easily, I guess, we're on the charlatanism borderline.
The meaning could be vacant of any fucking truth.
Like,
totally.
what are you even saying? Like, who
like
even
meaning
gives
can
a
be
shit?
empty too. I'm not saying that that's because something has meaning that
But
meaning is
here's
important.
what I would say. The small chart or small diagram, as we've shown it, highlights a moment cycle where something happens.
Right, which is all
Now,
which is meaning and
The point
through and through.
that I would put that as,
Sorry.
no matter what happens ever in your life, or whatever is happening, this, at least this much, can be a theory. Like, this is the idea, can be applied. This is a model of something happening in every moment.
The moment is moving, according to the dream.
So, at least that much can be observed in any moment and verified and noticed and watched, and then further broken apart or whatever.
Yeah, this is why the model is kind of static in that sense, because as you observe that and you observe that
Like,
the next moment and you observe that the next
It's
moment.
tough to say that, oh, there's just meaning because you know what when I say words, they appear in your head. Haha, that means life has meaning. Like,
But that's
that's
not- that-
bullshit. But if you look at like this small chart, the moment cycle, you're seeing what meaning is. As
Well,
it's,
the model already sort of points to its meaning. It's saying this is the meaning of this
The
moment is
process.
is the movement to the next moment. That's the meaning of moment to moment. Each sequential dream frame,
right.
if
And
you
just
will,
all I was saying
is meaningful in the sense that it's feeding the next moment. And the
Yeah.
model cuts out all the extra shit that you need to fucking think about and being like, oh, the only narrative that is really fundamental
Yeah.
in this situation, as liberal as it is, to allow for anything, is that a moment is shifting based on the dream. A moment is shifting based on the dream. That's what the model is saying. This is a way to fix the dream, to fix the moment, to fix everything all at once, so to speak, in a tall order sort of way. But that's the gist of that.
Kind of like an entry point.
Well, that's all it's all been about, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we've never delved into like energy potentials and shit.
Is this still all ontology? Because
It's part of it.
so we never actually got to the myth of ontology.
We got to a part where we can start building from it, finally. The signal, expression, signal. So, signal, consolidation, expression, decay, signal, consolidation. So when an expression becomes a signal onto a new layer,
Yeah.
that new layer is like saying, okay, only these expressions are valid as signals.
You're kind of pointing at one isolated expression, signal creation moment, but that could be in conjunction with a whole bunch of others coming all together to create, this.
I'm isolating
signal.
to like imagine one single stack being built out of the ether.
That's the tough part when imagining it, because what context are you talking about? Are you trying to identify the process of a single new signal coming out of some expression, or are you trying to show how? Because it's never just one expression. It's always like conjunctions of a bunch of other things coming from
Each one
who
is
the
a peak.
hell knows
Each
where.
one is a peak.
Like-
Each one is a peak, and in a different context, these peaks merge. In a different context, these peaks diverge.
Yeah. All I'm saying is it seems often too interconnected or dependent to
Well, that's fine. I mean, it
just
is.
isolate it to a single process of expansion, contraction. Boom, you have your
Well,
new,
that's-
your
that-
new best big thing.
The analogies are, but not the actual idea. So the analogies are like to show you how one stack could form out of this. So letters, words, sentences. One idea of stack. Atoms, molecules, macromolecules, tissues. Another idea of stack. On and on and on and on and on. We can have different peaks of this, that, the other thing. And all of those things can potentially send messages back to each other. Now, on this level, we're talking about like we have the living stack, the atom stack, the molecule stack, the biological molecule stack, whatever. And those are just things that communicate with each other. So we're just talking about like whole layers of things communicating up and down. No consideration for individuality or whatsoever of what's inside those layers. But then we can like
Right.
looking back
that's
into that.
That's kind of a weird thing to like imagine in your mind, like that everything is molecules bouncing, but it's like there's also energy like photons and that transference. But on some level, everything that's done in theory is kind of like coming down to this either like hitting or heat or other state transformations or whatever.
Check this out. One layer you have your atoms. Another layer you have your molecules. Another layer you have your biological systems. Another layer you have your literature. Now this delineation has a peak of literature, a peak of biological creatures, a peak of molecules, and a peak of atoms that all correspond to each other, to communicate with each other because they have a common ground under which to underlay each other.
Mm-hmm.
But this topology does not describe all the different individuals, all the different books, all the different molecules, all the different things. It's just like it condenses everything into one categorical peak. Back to our APS conversation.
Yep.
Portal. This peak looks like with 4 peaks. I mean, this range looks with 4 peaks. You step into the portal, you look into the individual element of one of the peaks. It's like an entire range unto itself.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that kind of like inwards, outwards, categorical abstraction, individual.
Mm-hmm.
What makes an individual part of that group or this group?
the model maybe encourages like thinking on higher potential of the objects that come into your view, because it's not an object isn't owned by its hierarchy of construction as to what it is, but objects become potentially, like, seen more as they are connected. Can be demonstrated that how connected every object is, no matter how far crazy you think that connection is.
Right. Right.
There is that potential for it.
So this touches on like jumping between peaks subjectively. When you like go down a layer, but when you come back up, you're like in a different range entirely due to an isomorphic strange loop cycle.
Mm-hmm. Analogies can do that.
But it also solidifies our animistic view. If everything is all these topologies, right? And the differences between, like, if you're in one topological scenario where it's like very rough categories being each peak, but then diving into each category is like its own plethora, and the other peaks actually look all different, and the way they affect everything else being different categories subject to the same environment, all of that, then you start to see that the animistic picture is not as static, one landscape, one mythology. It's more like
you just described a perspective.
You can start in like this one
or a context,
amorphous sort of topology, and then branch out into sort of various topologies, mythologies, and all of that stuff.
You could imagine
all
a perfect picture of the ideology range, but then there's the actual experience of encountering that thought space
now
over time.
Now, if you take that huge, crazy, amazing range of things and draw arbitrary borders here and crustify it there and crustify it there and all of that, this is when you start seeing the effects of the system. It's kind of like cancerous growth within that realm, which looks like a biological creature with shit going fucking wrong in places.
Right,
in an accelerated rates too.
And I guess we'll take a short break, but we're pretty much at the wrap-up stage, but we shall be right back. You are setted. Yeah, pretty much final minutes here, you could say. 5-10-ish.
So what was I rambling about?
Ah. You mean just recently, or?
I think we covered huge ground here, in that we can sort of explore the subjective shifts of the topology of the ontology. Sorry for the complication of the wording, but ultimately, if you follow along, this is pretty consistent with what we've been saying. So, like, you were pondering about the APS and the subjectivity of it and all of that stuff, and if you remember, in the language that we've developed, you would have this sort of like subject, an all-encompassing sort of boundary that says this, the name of this type means it has these properties, like it behaves such a way. And so whenever you're in that subject and you have objects of that type, you know within that subject they behave based on those how they behave based on those properties. Now the difficulty with that system was that those interactions between the objects could switch what subject you're in, which is not a predictable situation.
I think I remember you mentioned that probably a while ago.
And by switching a subject, the objects at play start to behave differently based on the difference in the properties as they get from the subject.
Peak hopping.
Yeah. And what we described here is like, we've described a very simplified topology of like just molecules, just atoms, just biological creatures, just social norms. But then if you look into each one, the story repeats itself again, right? Layering wise.
Also reminded of Gödel stuff, or whatever. Uncertainty.
Well, Gödel didn't prove uncertainty.
Whatever, that whole range of...
What Gödel did, just for in simple terms, is he said that within the context
unprovable statements.
Within the context of formal systems, that is, systems that have axioms, rules, and theorems derived from applying rules to axioms, you will have statements in sufficiently complex systems. You will have statements that cannot be arrived at through any theorem or axiom. Like, you can't take the axiom and apply rules and derive theorem by theorem by theorem by theorem.
This is true.
And arrive at that statement. However, that statement still is contained within the system and is a valid statement for that system. So there's like this weird disconnect between what you can build from the system and what the system can spontaneously arrive at. And those arrived at statements that the system will make are self-referential. So, for example, the statement "I cannot be expressed in system X" is an expression of system X, is made true by system X by being in it.
That's what I meant, but I forgot what we were talking about.
And true by not being arrived at by a theorem.
You were saying, like, some conflict can happen that can't be predicted, or whatever. Forget, it was a recent point.
So, okay. It's the contradiction theorem. So the statement "I cannot be proved in system X" is also contradicted by the statement of "I can be proved in system X," also being valid to the same system. So now you have two contradicting statements. So in
No, I
this-
just forget the original context of what even brought, like, what were we talking about? And then there's something in there.
Oh, okay.
I was just trying to say the reason I brought that up, the incompleteness, was because you don't know what's going to happen in another layer.
There's no logical leap, yes. Right. There's no quantifiable leap to be made from one layer to the next. The whole idea behind taking an entire expression and condensing it into a signal places it under the overarching reach of the next layer's protocols. And it's a similar situation, or rather, this situation is exemplified by convergent evolution, which is my go-to example for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's where you have a very narrow range of what body types will work on a bigger scale.
Sorry, I think we pretty much got a Packerino. Any final comments?
Yeah, just the convergent evolution stuff. So, the idea being is that you have a very different classification of species fitted into higher layers and taking on the body shapes that are repetitive, despite the fact that they're unrelated to each other. So, like how dinosaurs and crocodilians evolved into the similar biped, short arm creatures. How
Right.
dolphins, whales, and all that look like fish. How they were.
Well, and
previous
before that,
reptiles.
how many life forms had appendages, quote unquote? The thing that sticks out.
The point is that each time this happens, the bigger sized creatures tend to reflect one another, despite not being related
Wow,
to
man.
one another.
It's like we're all connected, yo.
So like bats,
Um,
birds, pterodactyls,
with that, we
all
go
that
and
shit.
cut it short on a beautiful note about the harmony of and the circle of life.
It's the circle of life.
Until next time.